TONEX, advanced settings, tips and tricks, let's go. So you've just gotten your TONEX, or you've had it for a little bit, and you're wondering what all the stuff up the top means, all the advanced settings. Today we're going to have a look at what all that stuff does. But if any of this is helpful, please consider liking and subscribing. We've just hit 200 subs, which, you know, in the grand scheme of things is still pretty small, but hey, got to start somewhere. So if you hit like and subscribe, leave a comment down below if you've done it, and I will give you many, many thumbs up. So the advanced features on the TONEX, I looked at it when I first got the pedal, the TONEX one in my case, and quickly forgot about it. But I was looking at it recently thinking, you know, I should actually sit down and learn how to use this software properly. And as is all things TONEX, it's not all as it seems. The software terminology can be a little bit convoluted and a bit confusing. So we're going to break it all down today and have a look and see what is what. So to make it easy, all I've done is recorded a really quick loop into my DAW. We're just going to loop that over and over again and play with the advanced settings, explain what they all do, and then demonstrate how they work in the context of a guitar sound. So let's go. All right, so I've got my headphones on for this section just so we don't hear any of the guitar loop coming through the studio monitors and picked up in the mic. So everything you're going to hear is going to be on the DAW. Okay, so as we can see, we are in Studio One. I've got two tracks up, one for the TONEX, which is currently muted, and then the other one is my voice. Down here in the insert section, we can see that we've got the TONEX inserted as a plugin, and then we've also got an EQ, which has got nothing on it at the moment. All we're going to do with this is when we actually get to the stage where we're looking at what the EQ section in the TONEX does, we're going to demonstrate it on this plugin so you can actually see what the EQs do in which frequency ranges. So with TONEX open, we can see up the top here, we have got the advanced features. So we've got it reset. We're also just running a Marshall JTM 50 at a moderate sort of gain level, just has enough harmonic information for us to actually like hear what we're doing with all the parameter changes. So I'll bring up on the screen, the TONEX 1 manual actually has a DSP audio signal flow in the manual. So the instrument gets plugged into the TONEX. We've got the input gain trim, which we covered in the last video that I'll link at the top now. Then we'll go into the noise gate, which can be pre or post. So if we have a look at the first part here, noise gate, if we turn it on, if we have it on first, it's obviously first in the chain before the amp, or post, it goes in after the amp. So that's pretty self-explanatory. Personally, I'd run it after the amp if I'm running gain so that it sort of clamps down on the noise when you're not really playing. We're not going to cover the amp and cab sections because they've been covered ad nauseum on millions and millions of different videos. Next step is the compressor. Very similar again. We turn it on, we can see what it does up here. So at the moment, the compressor is running after the amp and the cab. But if we switch it onto pre, the compressor is now acting like a compressor stomp box would. So your guitar will run into that and then into the amp, depending on what flavor you want. Obviously, if you want a compressor stomp box, you'll leave it pre. If you want to have a studio type compressor, you'll leave it post. Next step, modulation. We'll click it on so we can see what we've got here. So we'll put it onto pre first so we can see the modulation runs into the amp. Again, same way you would if you had a modulation pedal running into an amp. Obviously, we've got all the different effects here. Again, other videos cover that. We're not going to deep dive into that today. But then you've got it in post as well. So this would be more like a studio setup where you've got your guitar running into your amp. It's getting mic'd up. It's going into your DAW. You're adding the modulation effects after it. Again, with the delay, we'll turn it on. We can see where it is here. After the amp and cabinet, in post, in pre, you've got delays running into the front end of an amp. Again, simulating a stomp box. And then lastly, we've got reverbs. Again, reverb last in the chain after the amp, or you've got it before delays and modulation. So if we have delay here as well, even though we have reverb post, it's still last in the chain. So basically all that will do is change the order of how you have your delay and reverb stacked. So if you've got your reverb last, it's obviously going to be last in the chain. If you've got a post, it's going to be before the modulation, and no right or wrong. It's all personal preference, this sort of stuff. So just experiment and play with it. What we're more concerned at today is looking at this next tab, the advanced parameters. One thing I've noticed with TONEX is the EQ doesn't necessarily work the same way as what a traditional guitar amplifier would. You have to realize the EQ is baked into each one of the captures. So whoever's made the capture, they've obviously tweaked all the EQs on it to make that sound the way it sounds. They've captured that, and that's the EQ. Because it's not a model, we don't have the ability to go back in and tweak the EQ section as it would be on like a line 6 helix or a fractal sort of thing. So we have to think a little bit laterally with the EQ. So if we come up here, the gain is a sort of global, more distortion, less distortion. It's not going to work the same way a Marshall, in our case JTM 50, or a JCM 800, or a Bassman. They don't model the gain sweep off an amp. It's just, okay, here's your capture. It's got X amount of gain. Do you want a little bit more? Do you want a little bit less? And it sort of does that. Now we're onto the EQs. Here we can see post EQ and pre EQ. So what this means, if we have it in pre, TONEX manual, which I'll show again the advanced parameter list on a screenshot, we can see if we have it in pre, the EQ comes after the noise gate, but before the amp. Okay, so what we're essentially doing then is we're tweaking the sound of the guitar going into the amp. So we're changing the EQ on that. We're not necessarily changing the amp itself, but we're changing what the amp sees. Conversely, if we go into post, the EQ is now before the reverb. Okay, so it'll be here. So we hear the noise gate, the amp, cabinet, whatever else we've got in here, EQ, and then reverb. So what that is going to do is act as sort of a global EQ and change the EQ parameters of your whole sound. So the amp, the cabinet, any delay, any modulation, any stuff like that you've got going on, it's going to EQ that globally. Keeping that in mind is really important when we're EQing, because if we're expecting to EQ it and have the sound be similar to what we'd expect with the EQ section on an amp, when in reality we're EQing an amp and a cabinet and a microphone and some room noise and modulation and delay, it's going to behave differently. So you need to keep that in mind. What I'd like to see is 2 separate EQs. So then we've got a pre and a post in this signal chain. So then we can control what goes into the amp, like a faux amplifier EQ section, and then also a global right at the back end of the chain, so then we can do the final EQ tweaks. But anyway, we're going to have a look at what these controls do. Whether it's pre or post, it doesn't matter. The parameters are all the same in terms of how they affect what frequency range. So on the bass, goes up, goes down, happy days. The bass frequencies range from 75 hertz to 600 hertz. So then if we come across to our EQ section here, this is greatly exaggerated. The TONEX isn't going to do that, depending on how wild you go with the bass level, obviously. But then if we have a look at where the frequency sweep is, 75 hertz is about here, and then it goes up to 600, which is about here. So basically all this section is what that bass knob controls. Let's reset that again. The mid is the mid level, so how much mid frequency we add into it. The mid frequency, again, we go from 150 hertz all the way up to 5K. So that if we have a look at on here, 150 hertz, we are starting here and all the way up to 5K. So with the mids though, we are starting at 150K and we've got a sweepable EQ filter. So basically we can choose what mid frequency we want to bump or we want to cut. So we can choose basically any frequency in between here and here. Okay, so let's just pick one in the middle. We'll go back to TONEX. So we've figured out this turns the mids up and down. This chooses which mid frequency we're going to turn up and down. And the mid Q, this is a really cool one. If we go all the way down, if we have a look on this, turn it up, Q all the way down. So if we turn up the mid knob, it boosts a really wide range of frequencies. Conversely, if we turn the Q up and then we turn the mids up, it's just going to peak one really narrow sort of notched band. That's not really helpful if you're boosting. If you find a troubled frequency, you can notch one frequency out and it's going to give you some pretty cool results, clearing up the sound. Ideally though, I'd probably keep the Q somewhere in the middle. So then when you're boosting it, you're boosting a sort of natural mid section sort of thing. So if we've got our bass down here and then we're going to have our treble knob up here somewhere, having the Q set reasonably wide is going to give us a nice wide frequency band. So when we boost or cut the mids, it's going to sound natural. All right, back to TONEX. Same deal again. We don't have a Q filter on the treble. All we've got is a treble and treble frequency. So again, the treble knob is the treble volume and the treble frequency chooses what is the treble frequency that gets boosted. So we're going from 1K to 4K. So if we have a look back on the EQ plugin, we are starting right down here next to where the mids are, all the way up to here, to 4K, sorry, right there. Anything sort of above 6 to 8K on a guitar is just sort of fizzy and noise, so you don't really need to worry a bit too much about that. But same deal again. Unfortunately, TONEX doesn't really give us a Q figure of what the Q is set at, so we don't know how wide that frequency spread is that we're going to boost or cut, but just keep that in mind when we are playing with the mids. We go from 1K around here all the way up to 4K around there. So anywhere in there we can choose our treble frequency, boost or cut, depending on what we need. Now we're just going to have a quick look at what the guitar sounds like when we play with all these parameters. So I'm going to unmute it in a second. First, we're going to play with the bass and the bass frequency, and we're going to switch between post and pre. So we'll start with pre. So remember, pre's up the front, so it's emulating a sort of mock guitar, mock amp EQ, but also affecting the EQ of the guitar going into the front of the amp. So let's unmute it. And all we're doing is the bass at the moment. So bass frequencies all the way up, all the way out. Pretty subtle. It doesn't do a lot. But then if we click it to post, so now our EQ is down around here, after the amp, after the cabinet. A lot more pronounced. So if we play with the bass frequency, we'll take it down really low. And then swap it to pre. So we're on pre, now to post. So between pre and post, it's essentially doing the same thing, but in post, it's a lot more pronounced. So let's reset that, unmute it, and I'm gonna go through the mids. Same deal, pre, turn the mids up. So now we'll crank the Q. So we've got a really narrow frequency band. So this is like a notch filter. Or super wide. We'll change it to post now. Crank the mids. A lot more pronounced. Metal zone, mid-frequency sweep. All right, so crank the mid Q. So this is acting again like a notch filter. Looking for treble frequencies. Or turn it all the way down so it's super wide. So yeah, again, super pronounced. Reset it. We're going to do the same deal again to the treble so you can hear what it does. In pre. It does a little bit, it's very subtle. In post. All right. So that's how the EQ section of the TONEX works. Obviously we've got the fake gain control. This volume control is a master volume. Interestingly though, if your compressor is set post, like what we have here, and the compressor is on, obviously, the volume control now controls the gain volume of your compressor, not the amplifier volume. So keep that in mind. If you're using the pedal and you're just using the big knob, it won't work. So you've got gain control, and then your volume control is actually going to be compressor output gain. Okay, so let's unmute it, have a quick look at what the presence and depth do. Presence is like an overall treble bump, and depth is like an overall bass bump, basically. So if we have a look, presence, pretty self-explanatory. Depth, lovely. Righto, you amp sim loving legends. That was how to use the advanced section of the TONEX one. I've probably forgotten a bunch of crap because you know, I'm an amateur at this sort of stuff, but hey, I was curious, did a bit of research, played with a bit of stuff, thought I might do this video. You know, if it helps, awesome. If it's annoying, sorry bro. But yeah, like I said, like and subscribe, get me to 250 because that'd be sick. My goal for 2025 was getting to 200 subs, and I'm already over that. So whatever happens next is pretty much a bonus. But yeah, if there's any other TONEX stuff you want to have a look at, I'm hanging for this editor update to come out because I want to do a video about how you can use an acoustic into your TONEX. Because I've been doing that, but it's just easier to show you on the editor with the pedal than it is doing screen recordings, that sort of stuff. Because what I've been doing basically is I've got two sounds on it. One is my electric sound with a edge breakup clean used as a pedal platform with my pedal board, and then I can stomp on it again. I've got an acoustic amp with some compression and some reverb. My acoustic gets plugged into my pedal board. Everything's turned off, but everything runs through the TONEX and then goes to front of house. So it's like a really fun way of not having to, you know, fuck around with two guitar leads and two DIs and that sort of stuff. So it's been a lifesaver. But anyway, that's the end of that. Have a great week. I will see you again soon, and arrivederci.